So, officially, hello and welcome to a special Heartlands Transformation Network event hosted by the Jefferson Educational Society, Building on Heritage and Culture, a Path for Community Regeneration. I'm Ben Spagan. I'm the Vice President at the Jefferson Educational Society, a nonpartisan think tank headquartered in Erie, Pennsylvania, offering world-class programming, publications, and plenty more worldwide aimed at informing the public, bringing people together who don't always see eye to eye, but can gather together shoulder to shoulder, and in this case, screen to screen, to engage in civil civic dialogue. Among its various initiatives, the JES is a proud partner in the Heartlands Transformation Network. Now, the Heartlands Transformation Network is a transatlantic collaborative partnership dedicated toward closing geographic economic divides and reconnecting residents of rural and former industrial heartlands communities to economic opportunity. Network members work to return community pride and optimism about the future and diminish the appeal of polarizing, resentment-driven, isolationist, and ethno-nationalist political movements that threaten our democracies. Here for this conversation, we are joined by leaders and economic changemakers from the US, the UK, and Europe to learn about and discuss ways historical industrial communities that have experienced economic restructuring, job loss, and decline are managing a rebirth. And in part, building on unique assets, attributes, their industrial heritage, their arts, their culture, and so much more. With us, we have Jürgen Heim, Managing Director of the Research Alliance Ruhr, a cooperation of three universities in the Ruhr area. Now, before joining the Research Alliance, Jürgen headed the Ruhr Conference, an initiative of state government of North Rhine-Westphalia to aid the Ruhr area's economic transformation. Gene Robinson sits on the university executive board and leads the engagement and police strategy, focusing on building partnerships to enhance the societal benefits of the university. She is also executive leader for sustainability and social justice. Previously, she was Durham University's chief operating officer with strategic oversight of operations and external engagement. Pascal Enselny is currently leading the European Workshop for Culture and Democracy as part of Chemnitz's European Capital of Culture 2025. Now, his work focuses on capacity building, civil society participation, strengthening the resilience of democratic actors, and cultural transformation in East Germany. Drawing on a unique historical and social dynamics of the region, he seeks to promote inclusive dialogue and cultural exchange from European contexts. And finally, we have George Morrows, who for nearly 30 years has served as a special assistant to the president and senior director of for external relations at the Henry Ford, representing the organization's strategic interests and objectives in its relations with the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. In that role, George has identified, established, and maintained external relations which afford the greatest opportunity for advancement in terms of institutional positioning, leadership, and resource development. Now, for more about each one of our panelists' background, each of which is remarkably accomplished, as I've just scratched the surface of their accomplishments here, I invite you to head to the JES's website, jeserie.org, and we'll offer the opportunity for the panelists to share how and where you can connect with their work during this conversation. So, why should we focus on building heritage and culture, and how is it a path for community regeneration? Bluntly and perhaps broadly put, residents of ignored and economic left behind regions on both sides of the Atlantic feel angry and alienated. Now, local and national leaders are recognizing this and acting upon it, working to ameliorate the economic, social, and political divides, undermining our communities from within. Currently, we're seeing a convergence of interest and efforts on both sides of the Atlantic to learn from each other, to identify and enact the policies, programs, and practices that are effective in closing these geographic economic divides. When and where communities recover, a sense of pride and optimism about the future is returning, diminishing the appeal of polarizing political movements and the demagogues who stoke them. One of the many pathways that has been successfully trod to new economic growth and community regeneration is that of building and leveraging the heritage and cultural assets of older industrial communities and heartlands regions. From reanimating former industrial and historic districts, infrastructure and buildings for new uses in the society and economy of today, to celebrating and educating new generations about the community's unique history, culture, and contributions to the nation. Bringing current residents together and attracting newcomers through cultural things like art, heritage, and events and activities and spaces, All have been fulcrums for renewing economies as well as reestablishing community pride in place. Now, in a place like Erie, Pennsylvania, where the JES is based, it's the only county of the state's 67 connected to the Great Lakes watershed. We saw just a little over 10 years ago the power of celebrating history as the bicentennial celebration of the Battle of Lake Erie, fought during the War of 1812, generated hundreds of events, scores of publications, and one of the largest parades in the community's history. Today in Erie, we see new ideas in old spaces, coffee shops and breweries and retail taking up residency in dilapidated buildings that are being rehabbed. We see significant investment in the Erie Art Museum, as well as the area's Children's Museum, in the transformation of a key site in the industrial corridor, a 5.5 acre former industrial site that's now being remediated. On Erie's bayfront, once lined with heavy industry, we now see a public library, a maritime museum, a convention center, hotels, restaurants, and more, creating space for residents to gather, recreate, and, simply put, be. But these are also economic drivers, increasing tourism, lifting up small business, and not to be discounted. They really help residents reimagine the landscape of their place, literally. This kind of transformation is, of course, not limited to Erie. The son of a coal miner here, I grew up about 60 miles south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There we see a transformation of a city known for its steel, now known for its innovation, a place that's exploring its future, but without forgetting or discarding its past. And when I had the opportunity to participate in an international study tour in Germany, I can't say enough about how I was impressed with and moved by seeing the Zollverein coal mine industrial complex in Essen, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site that really does marry past and future in the present. Much work, of course, remains to be done, and one productive way to drive that progress is to share stories of challenges and success, insights and lessons with each other as to how arts, culture, and history can be levers for community regeneration. This transatlantic hybrid conversation will center on the approach, tactics, strategies, insights, and lessons learned from these leaders, these panelists that we have with us. Now, before I turn to our panel, I want to go through some quick housekeeping. We are hosting this event via Zoom webinar and are live streaming on the JES's Facebook page. If you're watching via Zoom, please feel free to interact with us using the Q&A function, as we are welcoming questions from you, the viewers. If you're tuning in on Facebook, leave your question in the comments section of this post. And if you happen to be listening to or watching a later broadcast of this, streaming it on demand, still send us your questions, your comments to keep this conversation going. More information about this program, the Heartlands Transformation Network, and other JES activities, you can visit our website, jeserie.org. Now, over to our panelists. Jurgen, I want to start with you. As I had mentioned, I had the chance to visit the Ruhr a couple of years ago as part of a delegation learning about how you managed multiple decades-long regional economic transition out of steel and coal and heavy industry and into a very different economy. Tell us about the role the region's industrial heritage and history played in that process, how it bore out over time. How did you use or build on that history in engaging residents to work together toward building something new and anticipating and navigating change?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ben, also for mentioning already Zeche Zollverein, the World Heritage Site. There are 100 things to be told about that cultural heritage site and its museum and all it shows. I'd like to pick out one single thing for today. It's how it was built. It was built by only 3 types of materials: concrete, steel, and bricks. And why was that so? Because those who built that mine and the halls that were needed for machinery and everything else were already looking ahead, knowing that at one point they would have to move on. It was like a bit like tent building. They were using material that would be easily be taken down and taken somewhere else and put up again. So in that sense, it's a bit of an irony that that should be an all-time museum now. It wasn't ever taken anywhere else. But the idea of transformation was already inbuilt in Zeche Zollverein. And I think it was very important to remind people of that when there was some kind of nostalgia for what was ending. There was some kind of grief for the golden age to be to be followed by hard times, to know that nothing is forever and that transition and transformation is the only constant thing. And this is what Self-Ein shows. This is what you could imagine if what you could experience if you go there and have a guided tour. But still, I'd like to share one photograph with you, which is not part of the museum and not part of the guided tours at all. I hope I'll get it managed technically, and you will soon see. No. Can you see the picture I have been sharing?
Yes, Jürgen, we could see it.
Now, here you can see a not very large swimming pool. It's within all the old machinery that was used to turn coal into steel coke. And what I love about this is that it's being reused. The young people coming here every summer, and by the way, I'm showing this picture now because it's summer. In winter, I would show you the more or less same site being filled with ice, and it's ice skating going on. The young people coming there, they are not being taught in any kind of way about their cultural heritage. They don't have to know everything about it, but what they do know is that this is a very cool and singular place that they haven't been to before, and this gives pride, and this also for many is the first way of looking back to where this region came from. But then it's very important, I think, to turn the head from looking backwards to looking forwards. Where do we want to go from here? And this is why you mentioned the Ruhr conference, then, why during the Ruhr conference, that was an initiative. It wasn't just one conference. It was a process and a brand mark, which was going on for a couple of years. The idea was that people in the Ruhr were called to have ideas and to develop projects that they would want to enact in the future. And that's what I'm working for now, is one of these projects, cutting edge research that the three universities do jointly. Anyway, we developed these projects with about 50 conferences. About 4,000 people were participating. And for each conference, we chose one of these sites. I wouldn't even call them heritage sites, just the halls that we have, the halls that we could use, some of them museums, some of them cultural sites, some of them restaurants, whatever. So to make sure that people were actually feeling we're developing the next step from where we come from. Thank you.
So Jürgen, I really appreciate that, and I think what was important to me to hear there is the resident inclusion, and not just in the after effect of we now have a plan, this is what we're going to do, in the spirit of this is being done to you or upon you, but rather on the front end, conferencing with people and discussing with the residents as the process is bearing out. This is really you're doing with, and that it's a collective effort to get that buy-in. Jane, I want to turn attention to England, if we can skip over to your neck of the woods, and we've seen cities in the Midlands and Northern England that have lost traditional manufacturing. Mining, shipbuilding, their industrial bases. Some have managed to diversify their economies and rebuild and reboot. Others still struggling. What's Newcastle's story? I want to hear that from you, and what role the arts, culture, history, and perhaps education with the university component, what that's played in the regeneration efforts.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ben, and really interesting to hear from you the link with Pittsburgh, because here in Newcastle we do have strong links with Pittsburgh and many similarities, and in fact Jürgen was saying also with Westphalia and the Ruhr. So I think sort of sharing these experiences from, if you like, post-industrial places is really helpful for sort of our collective understanding of these journeys. If you allow me, I'll just sort of go back in time a little bit and focus on a place that I think illustrates the experiences that have happened in different cities in the north of England. The place that I was going to talk about briefly is Gateshead, which is a small town in the northeast of England. It's on the south banks of the River Tyne, opposite Newcastle, and closely linked to Newcastle, impacted massively by the decline of heavy industries in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And that was not just an economic impact, but a huge impact in terms of identity and confidence of those places and communities. And what was interesting in the 90s, where many towns were and cities in the UK were looking at establishing out of town call centres to replace those jobs, high volume, low value jobs. Gateshead made a strategic decision to invest in culture. So what you saw through the late 1990s and early part of the new millennium was a massive program which was about regeneration led by culture and heritage. And that included really sort of unlocking the riverscape and thinking about how we could develop that space. And the quayside now in Gateshead is one which has world-leading music facilities, contemporary art, and iconically designed bridges. But I think one of the points I wanted to make is that those iconic venues are just part of the story. The really important story is about the extensive programs of public art and education that have spread across that place, and the deep community engagement that connected. An example I would give of that is the Angel of the North, which some may know as a sculpture by Anthony Gormley. It stands 66 feet tall with a wingspan of 177 feet. But what is important is it is made of Corten steel, which was produced in the northeast and is sited on the head of a pit from a coal mine. And the programme of engaging the local community who were involved in those industries with that public art was really important in terms of connecting the relevance of art to people's lives. And that informed a wider programme across the whole area. I think if we sort of fast forward to where we are now, it's quite interesting that Gateshead looks and feels very different to that which it did 20 or 30 years ago as a result of culture. But I think the points that Jürgen was making about kind of, connecting to the past, but looking to the future is really, really important. We now have in the northeast of England a mayoral combined authority, so we have a change in governance, which gives us a bigger geography to work across. But the focus on culture, heritage, tourism, but also future industries around creative industries, screen and media have very much come to the fore. And I think that sense of the way in which universities are working together across the region. So we have a collaboration across 5 universities that work across cultural heritage and creative industries, thinking about innovation in those spaces, but also critically thinking about skills and opportunities, so that we're able to sort of think about the way in which culture and heritage provides a sense of identity, but it also provides many, many jobs in this part of the world. So if I was to sort of reflect on some of the kind of key lessons, I think I'd focus on 3 R's. I think the first one is risk. There was a big set of risks that were taken by some ambitious local politicians back in the 1990s, and that's important. I think the second thing is relevance. We were often asked, how can we get our own angel? And my answer was always the same. It's like, you need to find your own angel. You can't replicate. It's about the place. So, and then I think the third thing is resilience. These things take a long time, and there needs to be resilience both in the, if you like, the political will and the anchor organisations, but also building resilience within those communities.
So, Jane, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the three R's, which I think we'll come back to in group conversation of how do we navigate the risks, how do we look at the relevance, and then the resiliency. It takes time. I think that what stands out to me is the difference between idea sharing and idea copying when it comes to regions of the idea of, well, this was successful over here, we must do the exact same thing. Well, your town or your city is not the exact same city as you might be a good analog or you might be peer cities, but there's truly unique differences in terms of the culture and the heritage. And so what works in town A will not work in town B unless you make it with the spirit and history of town B. So I think that that's something really good for us to hold on to as well. I want to jump across the Atlantic, proverbially, not literally, but I'd like to go to Georgia. I'd like to go to another iconic capital of industrial innovation, Dearborn in Detroit, where arguably the auto industry in the U.S. and the mass production economy were sparked by Henry Ford and other U.S. industrial innovators. George, tell us what the Henry Ford, tell us what Henry Ford was first trying to accomplish with the Henry Ford Museum and Greenfield Village, and how you've turned that historic mission into a leverage point or a fulcrum for education, inspiring today's economic innovators. So walk us through that journey.
So the Henry Ford, as it's known today, consists of a very, very large indoor museum and a very, very large outdoor kind of living history context called Greenfield Village. There was never really a village there. It consists of about 85 historic houses and other facilities that Henry Ford and his agents brought from some other location and set them up in this made-up space. It's the Disneyland of reality for many people. What a lot of people don't know, even though our historical artifacts, our collections are vast, 27 million artifacts in the collection. What a lot of people don't know is that Henry Ford did not start this place as a public museum. It wasn't a place for public visitors to go to. He started it as a school. And his idea at that time was, I'm collecting all these artifacts that represent American ingenuity, innovation, creativity, imagination. I'm bringing those artifacts here. And if I can put young, impressionable school-age kids, grades 2 through 12, in daily visceral contact with some of these artifacts, maybe some of that magic pixie dust will fall onto their shoulders, and we'll get our next generation of inventors and innovators and creators. The technical legal name of the institution is the Edison Institute. Thomas Edison, America's most famous inventor, was a friend and a mentor to Henry Ford. Henry Ford actually worked for Edison for a while as an engineer. And that same principle about educating the next generation to think in different ways, based on cultural heritage, technological heritage, etc., is still the very purpose that the Henry Ford has today. To be more clear about what the museum is, a few years ago, it changed its name from the Henry Ford Museum, which a lot of people thought, oh, we're going to go there and we're going to hear the story about Henry Ford. Well, he's a very small part of the story that actually gets told in the museum. So what is the place all about? Well, it's about innovation. So the name of the museum was changed to the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation. But again, that educational purpose is still at the heart of what was done back in Henry's day and what is done today in 2025. The way that it has gone about that has become more sophisticated over time. In Henry's day, his idea of, again, literally putting kids in visceral contact with these artifacts representing innovation would be to do things like take them out into the fields, because there are 3 working farms from various historical periods in America that are represented in Greenfield Village. And the people that work those farms are dressed in period clothing that are made by artisans in our own costume shop from historical patterns. So they dress, they look, they talk exactly the way people might have done in 1870 Indiana. But he would do things like take the kids out into the field and, okay, kids, today we're going to plow this field using a couple different plows. And they would plow it with a wooden plow. See how that went behind a team of horses. And then moving up to the more advanced plows, steel plows ultimately, so that the kids could literally feel the difference that that progress, that invention, that innovation made in the lives of the people who lived back then. Today, the more sophisticated kind of things that we do at the museum is we are now the place that sponsors and hosts the Michigan Invention Convention and the National Invention Convention, which are competitions for kids grades K through 12 from around the country, all of whom have to compete on some kind of local level, like in an after-school program or with the Scouts, something of that sort. And what they are asked to do is come up with an invention. And so they have to do several things. They have to come up with an idea that solves some problem that they identify. This is different than the FIRST Robotics kind of competitions, which are great. But FIRST Robotics tells the kids, build a robot that'll pick up this ball and put it in this basket. Invention Convention says you kids identify a problem you want to solve and then come up with something that's going to help achieve that end. So there's a social consciousness built into the invention so the kids come up with, because it usually involves something, some need that their family has or one of their friends has. Maybe a disabled kid down the block can't go on the swings that are in the standard playgrounds. What can I do about that? So the kids have to come up with the idea. They have to do some research. Is there some invention out there that already solves this problem? They have to make a prototype, 3D prototype. It doesn't have to be a working prototype, but some of them are. They have to chart and journal their entire invention journey, so it's cataloged. And then they've got to give a oral defense of their invention, why it would be investment worthy. Now, again, these are kids grades K through 12. And you would get to the national conventions by winning a state convention, and you'd get to the state convention by winning some local conventions. So there's a progression there. So at this year's nationals, I think they have 500 kids from around the country who are going to be in the national competition. And if you stop and think of, we've had kids now that since kindergarten have been doing this every year for 12 years. When you've got a high school senior now, 12th grader, they've got a different mindset than some kids that have never, ever been involved in that kind of activity before. So one of the things that I think for our larger discussion point here is there's got to be a focus on education for youth. Do not think of the talent pipeline that everyone talks about as just being like graduating high school kids and college kids. That's the talent pipeline. Well, no, talent pipeline starts way earlier, but you got to be intentional about how you do that. But if in fact you do get this next generation of kids that are creative, inventive, curious, that are driven by actually trying to solve problems, that's going to be the best asset any community, city, town, or region can have for reinventing itself or progressing beyond whatever levels of achievement it currently enjoys. So I'll just kind of add that early education piece into the mix of the discussion.
And George, what I appreciate about that is the building on of the idea of including residents in the process. And here you're speaking about including the youngest of residents in the process so that it's not as if we're not thinking about people that live in places until they turn 18 or they turn 22 or 25, but we're thinking about their journey up through that. I was thinking about, several years ago, I had the chance to go back to my hometown of a very small community in the southwestern corner of Pennsylvania, very rural. It was farm country, then coal mining country, then fracking country, all of which are still present in that area. And I was curious, what my high school alma mater would look like as I returned. And I'll admit that I felt badly. I was concerned about it, that somehow it would have deteriorated since I had been there. But I'm happy to report that I was incredibly encouraged when I got there because I saw leaning into new technologies. And I think speaking of the prototyping, I saw a makerspace lab that was encouraging high school students, middle school students to address critical issues in the region, one of which was prosthetics for injured animals. So they were helping support a local vet office by designing custom-made, prosthetics for injured animals, from cats to dogs to horses to so really seeing the ownership and agency youth can have, I think, is so important. I want to jump back to Germany where we began, and Pascal, I want to come to you because I think it is bold, I think it is inspiring, I think it is encouraging to hear capital of culture, that's what you're making in a place, a designation for community renewal. How and why did the community focus on culture as a building block for the future? What does your community's process look like in this work? What do you hope to achieve? Because this, to me, sounds really big, bold, and inspiring. Tell us more.
Well, to understand the capital of culture in Chemnitz, I think we have to go back to the summer of 2018. So this was when we were in our bidding phase, because you have to apply, you have to make a bid to become capital of culture. And in 2018, Chemnitz was shocked by this extreme right-wing demonstrations, riots, you can say, that happened in the city. And I think it even made it on the front page of the New York Times, even so. So even the US would know about this. And to understand where those right-wing riots come from, you also have to go back to history. So not just the deindustrialization during the GDR times, but also the big disruptional transformation that happened in the 90s. So to understand Chemnitz, where we were in 2018, you have to see it as a quite vast and empty place that can be a vessel that can be filled by propagandists, by, in this case, right-wing extremists. So what we saw in the summer was a very interesting event that was going on. And what is even more interesting was the reaction that happened within the civil society in Chemnitz. Because you had those right-wing riots containing of roughly 6,000 people, not all coming from Chemnitz, but coming from all over Germany. What happened 2 weeks later was the civil society from Chemnitz coming together and saying, we don't want to be shell-shocked anymore. We don't want to have this happening in our city. We say we are more and we are against those right-wing extremists. So 2 weeks later, we had this hashtag We Are More concert that brought 60,000 people to the city saying, we are not this, we are against what these right-wing extremists are standing for, we are more. So this energy we tried to foster and bring within our capital of culture bit. The thing about Chemnitz is our cultural sector is not as professional maybe as in other cities because we don't have an university with an arts focus. We don't have professional cultural actors because we're also suffering kind of a brain drain. Because when I grew up in this area, I didn't know anybody that was between the age of 20 or 30. So as soon as you hit the age of 18, you would leave immediately to the west of Germany. I think, Jürgen, you maybe know this from the Rhine region as well. It's a similar story. And so what we found in Chemnitz was a cultural sector that was very much DIY, very much eager to stand up and actually build a program. So this is actually what we did for our bit. We wanted to support the cultural sector on a very broad scale. So we're not just talking about museums, we're not just talking about theater, we're talking as much as planting a tree, to be honest, or celebrating garage culture. Because I'm not sure if this is a thing in the US, but I think it is even a thing in the west of Germany. But we here in Chemnitz, we have this big phenomena of those garage complexes, where people that were living in the big concrete buildings needed to have a place where they put their garages. So there were big garage complexes next to those buildings. In Chemnitz, we have approximately 30,000 of those garages. They were built by the community themselves and quite as much neglected in the 90s and 2000 years. And those garages, those garage complexes also became kind of a place where those right-wing extremists would like find new people, find new community. So this is also a reason why we want to go in those garage complexes, have them as a place where cultural events would happen, to kind of reclaim those spaces. So this is what we are trying to do as well. So all in all, you could say we are trying to fill up this empty vessel Chemnitz by a very diverse, by a very pro-democratic program that is delivered by the people from Chemnitz. And we are not as much curating a program, we are more or less trying to coordinate, trying to foster a program that is coming from Chemnitz and trying to give those DIY actors knowledge. We are hosting workshops and professionalizing them. We're trying to connect them with Europe as well by giving out travel funds, and to also have a co-program with the Czech Republic, because I'm not sure if everybody's aware where Chemnitz is. We're very much in the low bottom of Eastern Germany. And also a lot of people here think that because we are 50 kilometers away from the Czech border, that from this 50 kilometers on, the world ends. There's nothing behind this. But what is behind this border is actually a quite vibrant country called the Czech Republic, with a quite vibrant artistic sector, and also another country that is sharing a border with Saxony, the state where Chemnitz is in, is Poland, also a very vibrant and a very energetic country. And so we're trying to also push our cultural actors in Chemnitz to broaden their horizon, trying to connect with these countries as well, because Prague is closer to Berlin, to be honest. And a third step we're trying to do is including the region as much. So Chemnitz is a very shrinking city. So on our peak, we had 350,000 inhabitants. It was almost in the 1940s we're talking about. Then we had a short decline, a longer decline during the 70s and 80s. And then we had a sharp decline in the 90s again. And now we are at about 250,000 inhabitants. So we lost more or less 1/3, 1/4 of our inhabitants. So we are not as much. But we tried to connect with the region around Chemnitz. This is also something we got inspired by the Essen region. They had a similar approach there as well. And with our region, we're counting about 38 partner municipalities. We are roughly 1.5 million people. So again, we are more when we're counting the region as well. And together with this, we are delivering this program this year. We are having, in our book, we sketched out roughly 70 projects within this European Workshop for Culture and Democracy. We were able to not just have those 70 projects in 2025, but also to make it grow and have over 200 projects. We're hosting over 1,000 events over this year. And we're hoping to bring as much of those projects in the following years as well. So right now, everything is going very well, and I'm surprised as well a little bit.
So Pascal, for those that can see, but those maybe listening in or haven't caught it, I see on your screen as part of your background, see the unseen. And earlier before the call, we were talking about, I think, and it's come up in certain ways, and I want to call our attention to it as a group. The idea of taking hold of a narrative of a place and shaping that, because I think that's what you're really speaking to with this idea that if there is a vessel, something will be poured into it. So in some ways, you're either waiting for actors to fill it for you, or you have to take control of it and work to fill it. Here we see the unseen on your screen. Tell us about that.
So see the unseen is our slogan for the year. So see, meaning capital C as in cabinets, but also to see as in see, something that you haven't seen before. So back in 2019, when we were writing this bit, we had this issue of how can you address a problem, but kind of transform it into a positive action. And the people from Chemnitz, they feel unseen. And it's a fact. If you in 2018 you would either not know Chemnitz, or you would see it as this Nazi city, or see it as a grayish GDR building city. But this would the stereotypes you would have. So with this see the unseen, we bring out to the people not coming from Chemnitz as an invitation. Come on here, come on over, have a look for yourself and find out what's going on here. To be honest, there are Nazis and there are great buildings, but there are even more going on here to get yourself a full-on picture on this. But also towards the people from Chemnitz, it's a way to address to them, have a look at your own city in a different way. Try to figure it out, and you're part of this. So you can show your city, you can create your city.
I really appreciate that collaborative back to inclusivity when it comes to building this. Jane, I want to go to you for thoughts on this.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was sort of fascinating to hear that story, Pascal, and I'm particularly interested in the kind of capital of culture, because that was one of the things that we did in the Northeast as well. And I think sort of galvanizing around, if you like, a program. And ironically, we bid to be a capital of culture, and we weren't successful in the competition. We lost out to the Scousers in Liverpool, but we don't begrudge them, because actually the process of engaging, many parts of the community and thinking about that question of what do you want your story to be, and to own that story as a place and to be confident about it. I said earlier that one of the challenges around industrial decline is that lack of confidence and sense of identity. And I think reinventing a sense of place, which is still connected to the past, but that process, and I mean, I'd be interested whether other colleagues have been through a sort of similar process, but that sort of galvanizing around a concept, a sort of, a competition, an event. But I think the idea of having sort of places of culture can be very powerful in bringing different partners together, cultural and creative practitioners, but also businesses, universities, schools, and communities.
I really appreciate that, Jane. And what that makes me think of is where I grew up in Pennsylvania was not far from West Virginia. I was actually born in West Virginia, and recently through the pandemic, the state of West Virginia had launched this Ascend West Virginia campaign. The idea that they would pay people to relocate into certain towns. You would get a stipend for moving in. They'd help you with housing. You'd bring your remote economy into these places, and they'd give you a recreation pass for state parks, etc. The capital of West Virginia, Charleston, was so upset that it was not chosen in the first round that rather than hang its head and the residents would go off to the side, they launched their own local response that they would then encourage people to do it, and they would pay people. And so I appreciate it, because at the intro to Pascal said, it seems to me big, bold as an American, big, bold, and adventurous to be a capital of culture, that takes a lot. But even those that don't get it can still find a way through and value in the process. Jurgen, I want to go over to you, hand raised, and then we'll go to George.
Jane, I think that was a very crucial term you used, process. I think that, what we did during the Rook conference was that we became aware of the fact that change only happens in your mind. And many people think that, doing large participatory processes means a lot of work for maybe just adding 10% of additional knowledge and ideas. But this is not the way to look at it, because this process is the way of changing the mind and of having the change that is going to taking place also in the minds of the people. And only that counts. Nothing else does. And so these processes are so valuable. And what we tried to do, and Ben, in the beginning you said maybe there's no recipe for all, and I guess you're absolutely right. But what we did was we built on the power of cooperation. Our slogan was add value by cooperating. And I think that you can do that anywhere. And the Ruhr, the special thing is that we are actually, these 5 million people live in 11 very large cities, plus many more small cities. And they don't see themselves as the Ruhr. So we had to foster cooperation between cities. But I think anywhere else you can find either groups or institutions or whatever, and you can try to add value by cooperating.
I think, Jürgen, what's so valuable about thinking it through the lens of cooperation is both the being together and all pitching toward a common goal, but operating at the same time, cooperating, that we can move forward with progress together. And I think that helps again empower and encourage that buy-in from residents of a way to move forward, a way to be working through it, and back to Jane's word of process. And I think that goes back to one of the R's of the resilience of this does take time. George, I'm going to go to you on this.
I think this kind of builds on several of the last comments. I'd mentioned earlier that I grew up in Detroit when it had almost 1.9 million residents within the city. Today, I think it has about 650,000. And the city went through a period of real rapid, steady decline. And a lot of it was racially based. There were riots in Detroit in both the mid-1940s and also in the mid-1960s. And it resulted in a lot of white flight. So a lot of people left the city for the suburbs. And with that, the tax base was significantly and drastically reduced. And so there wasn't as much that the city could invest in basic public services, in its educational system, etc. Everything was in a point of decline. And a kind of grand plan from some of the city powerful at the time was to, at least symbolically, after the riots in '67, to build these towers, these big office towers at the riverfront. It was called the Renaissance Center. It was really supposed to speak to something. And they were huge. They were the tallest buildings in the city. They also completely blocked off public access to the riverfront. There was a big bunker in front that made it look like an impenetrable castle. It was not a very inviting kind of place. So the city fathers got that one wrong in terms of a kind of urban planning design. And I think it spoke to one of the things that is really crucial about civic regeneration. You have to ask the people of what are you most proud of in this place? You have to find out what they're most proud of. What do they want their kids to understand and enjoy? What do they want visitors to come and see, and to feel, or to taste? You have to start there. And I like to remind people that when Detroit decided to really change and make some investment in downtown Detroit, the rebuilding of downtown Detroit, the first thing that was done was this cultural visionary named David D. Chiara, who was a dear friend of mine, reclaimed this old, decrepit, abandoned opera building, opera in Detroit. He was the first one to make a big investment in reclaiming an old part of the cultural past, investing money, investing time, gathering the resources to bring that opera company and that building back to life. So it wasn't an auto industry, wasn't anybody like that. It was the cultural sector that made that first and earliest investment. Then what else happened? Well, of the 4 major sports teams Detroit had, and that carried the Detroit name, 2 of them were no longer operating in Detroit. They were operating outside the city. So the Detroit Lions were playing in Pontiac, and the Detroit Pistons were playing in Auburn Hills, about 20, 30 miles north of Detroit. The stadiums were built here, and stadiums are often very controversial in terms of investment, but it brought those teams back to the city of Detroit. Detroit's a very big sports town, and it's something that the people cared about, they valued. Same thing happened with, I was fortunate enough as part of my career to work for the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. And they had this beautiful performance hall called Orchestra Hall. But it had been abandoned, and it was in disrepair. And the city rallied to save that building and bring the orchestra back to play in that facility. And it's one of the finest concert halls in the world. When Detroit underwent its bankruptcy, the city went bankrupt. It was the largest American city to ever undergo bankruptcy. And they're trying to figure out, okay, well, what kind of assets do we have that we can kind of pay all the bills that we have to be paying? And one of the suggestions was, well, man, you got the Detroit Institute of Arts. They got a lot of paintings in there, and sculptures that are worth a lot of money. Do we really need that many? Now, in this blue-collar town of grit and determination, you'd think that might be an easy sell. It was the people that said, no, you can't do that. People who'd never been to the DIA as a visitor were saying, no, you can't do that, because that is something in which they took pride. And so they came up with a different strategy, a different grand bargain. And so the cultural piece, I think, can play a more significant and important part in people's connection to place than a lot of people give it credit for.
George, there was a lot that you said there that I really appreciate, but I think what hangs with me there is the idea that even those who had not been to the institution were fighting for it, and I think that's where, in conversations like this, when we're looking at cultural heritage, arts, and history and culture, that we have to move away from thinking of them as luxuries, in terms of this is only things that the affluent can afford, or only things that those who, have some accumulated wealth can partake in. That I think it's the public appeal to this, and again, core to that sense of identity, like a place like Detroit, known certainly for the automotive industry, but also to Detroiters, the idea of arts and culture and sports and where they convene and how they gather. Pascal, I want to go to you here for this as well to chime in.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to George, because I really share what you said, that you have to ask your people, what are your stories you want to tell? And you have to support them in telling the story. Because while we were having this conversation, I got reminded by a journalist who asked me the question, how do you motivate your people from Chemnitz that are kind of lethargic and sluggish? And I was like, wait a moment, this is not what I'm experiencing here. It's not what, I don't feel the people being lethargic and sluggish. They are more or less a force that is actually trying to do a lot. It's like a river that's flowing. But the problem is it doesn't have a proper riverbed where it's flowing. So you have to invent tools, you have to invent programs to kind of work with this energy. And not every program is working for everybody. So we had different scales of open calls, having bigger mid-scale projects, but also having like kind of very micro grants containing of 2,000 euros for a person. You only have to apply with a sheet of paper, and then you get the 2,000 euros, and you can have a garden fest or something like this. Also, we had a program for people that said, no, I don't want to do a project by myself. I'm not interested. I don't have the time for this, but I want to be part of this. So we started a big volunteering program where people could say, oh, I want to give 3 or 4 hours of my time to this whole project. So right now we're having 1,200 volunteers supporting this capital of culture. So we built kind of different ways where people could enter this whole program. And this kind of worked in telling a lot of stories for this Chemnitz capital of culture year.
And then in Pascal, I was thinking about the idea of these. I said big, bold, in terms of some ideas, but you offered the small examples. Plant a tree, just smaller scale projects that it doesn't have to be an overnight transformation. It doesn't have to be something that somebody commits 2 years of. If you have a half an hour on a Sunday, if you have a half an hour on a Monday evening, that these are ways that you can engage. I think that that's really powerful. Jurgen.
Well, I know we are running out of time, but I just because we were talking about narratives at length, I'd like to add one little story. I think that we, just like journalists, have to do fact checking. And my example is, that regions like to be compared also as far as the students and the performance is concerned. And the Ruhr didn't figure very well there. So it added to, well, they are sort of left behind and backwards and all that. But then if you look at it, you find a reason why this is the case. It's quite simple. The Ruhr has always been a region of immigration. And people came from all over the world, and they grew up with languages at home that were not German. So it was natural that they wouldn't be as good at school as people would be in all German surroundings. Now, if you have that explanation, you can turn the whole story around and say, we in the Ruhr are experts in integration. We managed to integrate, since 100 years, Polish immigrants, Turkish immigrants, now Arabic immigrants. And this is a strength that we have. And yes, it does result in some rankings in a negative way, but that doesn't mean a thing. So fact checking, turning around bad images, finding out what is behind it.
Jurgen, I appreciate that, and I know we are running short on time, and I want to make sure that we save a chance for you all to share again more work of what you're doing and how people can connect with you there. We do have a question coming in from the audience, and Jane, I'd like to turn to you for this one because you and I have mentioned Pittsburgh a couple of times, and this person is thinking Pittsburgh in mind. And the gist, and I'm hoping I'm doing it justice with our remaining time is there is a process when it comes to a story. There is the pre-story of when it is successful, and then the process of losing something, the process of change, and that we are emotional, throughout that, guiding people through that change, going from longing for something that we had to imagining what we can have into the future. Do you see in the work that you've done how to deal with emotions with residents, how to deal with emotions in processing the loss of an industry into the gain of something new, or even the hope of having new? Jane, I want to turn that one to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such an important question, and I suppose my reflection would be thinking about those opportunities for engagement to tell the stories of the past. So, as an example, as we were developing a contemporary art gallery in Gateshead that had previously been a warehouse, and where the production of ropes was the kind of main industry, we worked with the local community to tell their stories and to have an exhibition about the stories of their past, the people who were employed there, the families, and that became part of that transition. Similarly, another example in the Northeast in Blyth, we're working on a project called Re-Energising Blyth in Southeast Northumberland, where again, it's about giving the space for those communities to tell their own stories and to reflect on what that means for their future. So I think kind of creating the spaces. And my very brief reflection on in Gateshead, where I think things have changed so massively, is that we have a world-leading music centre there, where every school in Gateshead is involved in that. To some of the points that George was making. Now the kids there don't think that's anything extraordinary. They expect to be able to see world-leading musicians performing on their doorstep, and for me, that is success.
I really appreciate that, and we're almost out of time. Jane, just as you'd like to share, or as much as you'd like to share, for those that want to dive deeper and learn more about the work you're doing, what would be the best way to connect with you, where to find you, where to find more about all of the exciting things happening?
Please do get in touch with me. I'm a Pro-Vice Chancellor at Newcastle University. Very happy to share email contact details. So do reach out. Very, very keen to learn.
And George, to you, where can folks connect with you, connect with the Henry Ford, and more of the work that you're doing?
Henry Ford's got a very robust website. If you want to connect with me personally, it's george.moros@gmail.com.
Terrific. Thank you. Pascal, to you, folks that want to learn more and see the unseen as you continue this journey, where do they connect with you?
Yeah, just follow us on social media. So you find us with Chemnitz 2025, Chemnitz with CH, not with a K. And yeah, you find us on Facebook, Instagram, and also follow us on our website.
And Jürgen, for folks looking to connect with your work, where do they find you? Sorry, Jürgen, you are still muted.
I'm sorry. You can either Google University Lines Ruhr, or you can just call UA Ruhr in one word, UA and then Ruhr in one word, .de. And there you find also the research alliance I'm working for, down to our personal data.
And the folks at the Heartlands Transformation Network and the JAS will be working on a recap of this conversation. We'll include all of that information with that as well. We could easily have spent an hour plus with each one of our panelists, but the insights into hear you all in dialogue with each other, I think has been incredibly valuable. And I'm so grateful for your time, as well as grateful for the time of those that took the time to be with us and to learn here. I hope that they found something of value to take back into their community, an example to hold up, and something to share. So panelists George, Jane, Jürgen, Pascal, thank you for your idea sharing your insights, your experience, your knowledge, and your expertise for this engaging and informative conversation. And again, thanks to all of you for watching along. A reminder to find out more about the Heartlands Transformation Network, including the exciting work happening there under the leadership, which we are grateful for, of John Austin. We are excited to share all of that on our website, jeserie.org. You can connect with us there amongst a whole range of other things. For the Jefferson Educational Society, a proud partner of the Heartlands Transformation Network, helping to host conversations like today's. I'm Ben Spagan. Thanks for listening and learning with us.